Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Now we want to go global, and how do we deal with religion and sustainability on a global perspective? So we have two great speakers for that. One from Elaine Storkey, who's president of TEAR Fund, the Christian Evangelical Alliance Relief Fund, and the other is Fazlun, who founded a sort of Islamic equivalent, the Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences. So it's great to have these two perspectives on such a big topic, and I'm really looking forward to hearing them. So without further ado, let's ask Fazlun to kick us off for half an hour.
Firstly, Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings of the Creator. Firstly, I need to thank the organizers for inviting me and giving me this platform. And secondly, I also need to say that I'm fascinated by the erudition and the eloquence of previous speakers, and I thank them for their inputs. Somehow, I get the feeling that they all had a sense, or I had a sense, or they had a sense, that they may be speaking on shifting sands. I definitely feel I am. And whilst this gathering understandably focuses on consumerism and development, there is an element which not necessarily has been left out, because obviously this is not the theme of it, about the emotional, psychological, social issues. I'm trying to draw your attention to the very human ecology that's been broken and breaking up. And myself and my dear wife, who's there in the corner, talk about this quite intensely. We have grandchildren, and she makes a special study of this, and I borrowed one of her books to occupy in what spare time I may have in my room. And I picked up something at the back of this, which I would like to read to you. And this is a book by Sue Palmer, who, if you're a teacher, you will know all about Sue Palmer. And it's called Toxic Childhood: How the Modern World is Damaging our Children and What We Can Do About It. And here's the paragraph. And it's called, under the heading, Detox in Childhood. It is the best of times, it is the worst of times. We live in an age of comfort, convenience, and promise. A wonderful place for grown-up human beings to work and relax. But it's not always the best of all possible worlds for children. Deep in our hearts, we all know it, but we are frightened to admit it. The world we created is damaging our children's brains. This is from Sue Palmer, who is not to be taken lightly. And all I'm trying to draw your attention to is that while we are talking about sustainable consumption and sustainable production, and how we can survive in a planet that is growing exponentially, that we have to consider the kind of lifestyle, what the kind of lifestyles we have chosen is doing to families, to people, to parents, to mothers and fathers and children and grandchildren. And the worrying bit is that nobody seems to want to think, or maybe think, or talk about how the kind of things we've been engaging in talking about is affecting the very familiar processes in our homes, our children. Because we aspire for our children what we ourselves have been through and want to keep for our children what we already have. But the fact of the matter is that if we carry on like this, they will have nothing. So there has to be a fundamental shift in the way we look at this. Now, if you have been looking at the posters out there, then I can skip the first few slides of this presentation. You see, we are talking about sustainability, but I need to remind you that the United Nations Development Policy and Analysis Division have quite a different take on it. And it's also reflected by the things that the first speaker this morning, sorry, I've forgotten your name, Paul, said that the government is hell bent on aggressive expansionist policies. You see, and how are we then going to posit the whole idea of sustainability within these expansionist policies? That is a conundrum. And so we have to change. I asked the question, I asked you the question, how can the mindset that created these issues, these problems that we are talking about, produce the changes that we want to see? I'm saying we have to change. We have to change radically. This is why Edward Wilson said that the human species is an environmental abnormality. He said that in 1962, and of course, if I remember the other bit, he says, never before in human history has the human species decided to commit suicide through a rational process. That's what he said. And I go to the bottom, existential philosopher Martin Heidegger says that the humans are reduced to being a standing reserve for technology. I say don't have any illusions about it. You don't control technology. Technology, in fact, controls you. So please think about it. We are not in charge in a sense. We have gone so far down the techno route that it's beginning to control us. We cannot do without it. Now, I've been trying to get to the bottom of this, asking myself, how did we get to this point? You know, and I also have, so far, I have to say that we have been tinkering with technicalities. Because of the profound issue that we are facing, we haven't gone deep enough or far enough to try and address the issues. So I'm saying, what is it? What has happened? Why are we here? Why are we talking like this? And I have an image. Of a huge hole being dug by great bulldozers. And thousands of people with little buckets, all of us in this room, trying to fill this hole. And the hole never gets filled because the bulldozers are hard at it, working day and night to deepen this hole. And all of us try, the little people, all of us here, try to fill this hole up. And it goes on. It's happening now, it doesn't stop. I don't know how we can stop it. I really don't know how we can stop it. So, what happened? I tried to wind the video back, go back and back and back and back and say, where did it all happen? Where did we go wrong? If you agree with me, there's something wrong. You must think that there's something wrong because you're here. But what is wrong? Where have we gone wrong? What changed? What's changed to bring us into this situation, this position? And I'd like to give you a short quote from a piece I did for the United Nations Environment Program magazine, Our Planet, back in 1966. And I say, until quite recently, the human race both rebels and conformists, the ignorant and the enlightened, whether in small self-governing communities or vast empires, barbarian tribes or points of high civilization, functioned unconsciously within natural, unwritten boundaries. It had an intuitive disposition to live within the fitra. That's a term in the Quran. Fitra, roughly translated, means a patterning, a primary pattern, a natural pattern of creation. So we had an intuitive disposition to live within that pattern, though this was only achieved by a conscious recognition of the existence of a superior force, the divine. This was an existential reality, neither idyllic nor utopian. But that changed. There was a shift. And that happened, without making too fine a point in it, during the time of the Enlightenment, Descartes and all that. And what Richard Tarnas had to say about this in a book he wrote, I can't tell you the date, called The Passion of the Western Mind, he said, so the traditional worldview was challenged by what we have come to know as the Enlightenment, having its origin in the 16th century. And he observes that this movement achieved its maturity in the 19th century, finally resulting in a radical shift, a radical psychological shift of alliance from the divine to the human. That was, in my view, one of the two major shifts, paradigm shifts that took place in human existence. Before that, we were all of us, regardless of our faith, we were all part of that area, that zone in which we were subscribing to the existence of the divine, and all our lives were then were part of that process. So then, when Descartes said, we are laws and processes of nature, that exploded the whole thing. So we took control in our minds, we took charge. We put divine to a side, and the human became more important. Now the Quran tells me, do not corrupt the earth after it had been put right. That's the position I take. And how can we be lords and possessors of creation when the very first line in the prayer that I offer every day says, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, praise be to Allah, the Lord of the world, the Lord of creation. Sayyid Hussain Nasr, the now teachers in Washington, he says there is near total disequilibrium between modern man and nature, as attested by nearly every expression of modern civilization, which seeks to offer a challenge to nature rather than to cooperate with it. That's briefly stated what I think is the first thing, the first trigger that happened that took us away from this position. Again, another quote from this article I did for the UNEP of magazine in 1996. I quote, before we were told that nature was there to be plundered, people who lived in the pre-Enlightenment era were basically no different to us. They have the same positive and negative human attributes, but the results of human profligacy were contained by the natural order of things, which transcended technological and political sophistication and even religious disposition. Excess in the natural order was contained because it was biodegradable. When all civilizations, however opulent, profligate, greedy or brutal, died, the forests just grew over them. They left no pollutants, damaging poisons, or nuclear waste. By contrast, in assuming we survive as a species, archaeologists excavating our present rampant civilization are going to have to wear radiation suits. Witness Chernobyl and Fukushima. I know people on the other side of the fence of nuclear energy dismiss it, but I'm saying, just think about it. If we go on go on this way. So, in fact, what changed that? What changed all that? The second point that I'm trying to make is money, the nature of money, how we say it and how we contrive to contract it and how we define it. And I would like to read from Kurtzman, a Harvard scholar who wrote about 10 years ago, and he says, in spite of all its fervid activity, money remains a naked symbol with no intrinsic value of its own and no direct linkage to anything specific. Money is debt. The fact is that if we all, some point in the future, manage to pay all our debts, there'll be no money. Money is debt. What you have in your pocket is debt. It doesn't exist. This is why the Quran forbids usury, because money is created, first of all, out of the before the fractional reserve system was the aspect of what we call usury, which was riba. And riba is forbidden in Islam, and the verse in the Quran which talks about it is, those who practice riba will not rise from the grave except as someone driven mad by Satan's touch. It will take you over. But once it's taken you over, you will not know how to get rid of it. So what's actually happened is not only have we gone beyond the usurious thing, we also have managed to create a system where we can create money out of nothing. It's called the fractional reserve banking system. And what happens is that we can then create to infinity money that doesn't exist, as the first speaker, what was her name? Anne Pettifer tried to she was desperately looking for a curve. I'll show you that curve in a minute to show what is really going on here. And the fact of the matter is, just think about it. We have a planet that is finite, right? Then how can you subscribe to the reality of what's happening here? That you allow people, the banks especially, to create money out of nothing to infinity, exponentially. So the equation is lopsided. If it carries on like this, the planet will be reduced to look like the surface of the moon. It's already happening in certain places. It just cannot carry on. Because I lived 3 years and 10, or that was, and I haven't seen the planet grow in all my life, have you? So how can you expect this kind of growth to go on and on? Now you take the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and add to that Indonesia, Turkey, following fast on their heels, nearly double-digit growth figures. 15 years growth in 3 years, just like that. It's not going to work. And every one of those countries aspire to the living standards of the north. It just won't work. They will not have it. They will not get it. If they're gone, it will be blown before that. You see, so that's why it's unreal. Now, this is why the much maligned Club of Rome, way back in the 1970s, said there are limits to grow. And Aurelio Pecci said, signals are late, incomplete, distorted, ignored or denied. Momentum is great, responses are slow. You see, the thing is accelerating. And that neatly brings me into a concept that I would like to introduce you to something that was done, some work that was done about 100 years ago by an American historian scholar called Henry Adams. He articulated a hypothesis called the acceleration of history. And he did this on the basis of some data he gathered about the consumption, about the increase of technological change in the 19th century, about coal consumption and the use of steam. And he said that history was expanding exponentially, that is almost unstoppable. And he constructed a graph on a logarithmic time base, which was exponential. Now, he said about this, the world will not double or treble its movement. The world did not double or treble its movements between 1800 and 1900, but measured by any standard known to science, the so-called progression of society was fully 1,000 times greater in 1900 than in 1800. At the accelerated progression since 1600, it will not need another century to turn thought upside down. Law in that case would disappear and give place to force. Morality would become police. Explosives would reach cosmic violence. He was saying this in 1905. Disintegration would overcome integration. And he said that we have until 2025. What do you think of that? He said in the early part of the last century that we have till 2025 to turn things around. That is the point. Now I want to look at this from an Islamic prism, from an Islamic perspective. Because Henry Adams, great man that he was, in my view, talked about secondary and tertiary causes, which was technological change driven by the increase of fossil fuel consumption in the 19th century, which at that time was coal. Looking at this as Islamic from my sources, I'd say, just think about this. This curve, in fact, began to rise about there. Now, if you talk about, if you can put the progression of history in a graph, you can say that beyond that, go back to the agricultural revolution 8,000 years ago, you could say that progression was, human race was progressing, but it was slow, and it took a flat line all the way to the horizontal axis. But something began to happen here. And I will put it to you, Calvin 1550, Henry VIII 1535, see what I'm getting at? That was when the Christian community went against that teaching and introduced usury. That's what happened. Because that was when people began to lend money usury, and 1694 was when the Bank of England gave its first loan, and it set the model for the fractional reserve banking system, which is in existence today. Now, in the high streets of Cambridge, bank managers are writing just lines on their ledgers or punching digits into their computers, which represents money. It's nothing. So, and Henry Adams said, be careful. Now, what I'm getting at here is that everything that was said in the past few years, while I accept that we have to work on and move, it's tentative. It's not going to be fast enough, soon enough. We have to move quickly. Because, my friends, there is no time. We don't have the time. There is not the urgency. I think this is why Dylan McKibben started the 350 movement. This is why we feel so strongly about it. Because it has to be done quickly. 2015, tipping point. We have no time. So whilst we are talking about sustainable consumption and sustainable production, how long is it going to take to turn things around? See, we have to turn things around very, very quickly. But do we have the time? Right. Okay. Now what do we do? As a Muslim, I see I'm part of the problem. I'm part of the consumer problem. I have a bank account, I have credit cards, I have a cell phone, I'm hooked into technology. This is technology. You see? So I need to find solutions. And where I'm coming from, we need to talk to each other. I also need to go and tell the Muslims, look, you have something very special to offer. Because in spite of it, Islamic banking is an oxymoron. Don't believe in it. Because Islamic banking still functions within the fractional reserve system. So we have to think of something different. So what we are trying to do in the foundation that I work in is trying to set up, go back to the source and say, what is it? Where can we make a difference? How can we tell people that they have to change and they have to change drastically? Or if they cannot change, things fall apart, what do we do? What do we do if things fall apart? What have we got? But we have something. So here is I offer you a model. I offer you a model. This is how we look at the environment. There are so many different models. Now I have to say this, Islam is inherently environmental. The Quran is inherently environmental. The Muslims don't know this.
5 minutes.
Thank you.
Just to encourage you back.
So we have developed, so I'm going to rush through this. So we have developed a model in which bring to the awareness of the Muslims that these things can be taught and understood, and how they then can be. So we've set up training programs. If we have more resources, we do more. We work in North Africa, East Africa, Indonesia, and other places, and hopefully in Bangladesh as well. And that is the 4 principles we work on. So if I had more time, I'll talk about it. So Islamic approach 2, the verse in the Quran which is encourage what is good and praise what is wrong, and establishing a just society, moderation and simplicity, balance between opulence and poverty, social justice, moderation in consumption, natural resources shared equally by all, care for the environment. Wealth, accumulation is discouraged, and here the verse from the Quran, fierce competition for wealth distracted you until you went down to the graves. No, indeed, you will soon know. Again, no, indeed, you will soon know. Accumulation is, in fact, a sin. And a corollary to that, those who compete in doing good things are among the righteous. Wealth, giving and sharing encouraged. Hoarding is discouraged. Giving, there's a thing called zakat in the 5 pillars of Islam. You give 2.5% of your savings. Sadaqah is voluntary giving. There's a concept called al-infaq. The deprived have a right over the surplus wealth of others. And the Quran says, have you seen him who denies his faith? He is the one who harshly rebuffs the orphan and does not urge the feeding of the poor. Money. Money is a factor of production. It is a medium of exchange. It is value for man, value for value. No paper fiat money. Value contingent upon the results of production. In capitalism, reward is predetermined by interest plus collateral. Threat of loan recall or foreclosure always present. Markets. In the Islamic market, prices determined by free and open transactions. Produce must be open to inspection. What is prohibited is hoarding, monopoly trading, gazumping, false or misleading information. Contract. There are a whole series of contracts. I've just chosen 5 for you, where there is a partnership. There is no banking in Islam. If I want to start an enterprise, I come to you if you have money, and you say to me, I will share in the risk. If I go, you go. So the lender shares in the risk. That's called a partnership. There's a mudabara contract, agreement between the provider of capital and labor. There's a buyer al-salam, advance payment based on weight of produce and delivery time. No futures trading. You only have a one-to-one transaction. You cannot transfer that contract to somebody else and start the futures trading. There is in the Quran a concept called qard al-hasna. It's called a beautiful loan. You have, if somebody is in need and you have the money and you ask for it, if you want to give it, you give it, and there is no interest. And there is a contract. But the man or the woman who takes the money will only pay it back if and when that person can afford it. So you give it on that basis. But there is a contract. Wages paid before the sweat dries on the laborer's brow. The environment. There are special zones for environmental protection. There's the HEMA. You can have a HEMA for the bees, where certain parts of the Islamic world are shut down for the spring to allow the bees to do the pollination. You have hurrying systems, the preservation of water courses, and you have all the other 3 or 4 that are, there's more to it. So this is our template. And in the work that we do through our organization, this is what we say. Self-help, localization of production, markets and distribution, means of exchange. Outcome, sustainability. Did you answer that question? Now, this is interesting. I'd like to make the connection between this and what the transition people are doing. They are real. You see, I think they are possibly a way out of this conundrum, because they are ordinary people living in Derbyshire and Leicester, ordinary people, trade unionists, business people, local councillors. We are part of it, and we want to be part of it. My wife is quite actively engaged in 1 or 2 of these organizations. And we say, well, sort of take our perspective as well, and we'll take from you. Because they are talking about local currency, they are talking about local produce, they are talking about reducing food miles, the kind of language we talk. So there is a synergy here, and we can work together, you see, and this can be done. Finally, I'd like to leave you with a thought. A quote, not from the Quran, not from the Bible, not from the Upanishads, not from any religious text, but from something I read, an article some years ago, written by Professor David Ball, who's a professor of education. I don't know if he still is, over at the College of Ohio. I'm going to show you this in a walk away. So if you have to read, thanks for listening. Okay. All right.
Coming on last is, of course, that everybody's saying all the wise, wonderful insights that you've been longing to give, and I've been ticking them off one by one as the conference has progressed until I got down to half a sheet of paper, at which point I've had to really rethink what I'm going to give you. I thought at least I would have a slot left for theologians, but then Ruth has snitched that one, and she's actually done some of the work I was going to do there. But you'll come along with me, and I'm really just winding up and then having a word to John to finish our fantastic series together. It is a privilege to be here. I'm delighted that you asked me to do this, and we'll try and get through this together. In July this year, as he concluded his considered prospect that the world is now moving towards 7 million inhabitants, the United Nations Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, as you all know, gave one of the challenges that we've come to expect from the leadership of a man who longs to make the world a better place. And this is what he says, and I think it's very salutary. We've got enough food for everyone, yet nearly 1 billion go hungry. We've got the means to eradicate many diseases, yet they continue to spread. We have the gift of a rich natural environment, yet it remains subject to daily assault and exploitation. All people of conscience dream of peace, yet too much of the world is in conflict and steeped in armaments. And I would echo what Juliet Davenport said, her horror really at Liam Fox's assertion that we need to be exporting more armaments to make up the shortfall of the 7 billion imports that we're landing ourselves with. When we listen to many politicians in the West, I think we listen to so much that's trivial, that's half-baked, that's parochial, that's banal, and sometimes it's just dead wrong. And I find this is rarely the case with Ban Ki-moon. 2 years ago, when he was warning people about climate change, he addressed a group of religious leaders with enormous enthusiasm. In fact, the enthusiasm is hardly mitigated in his speech. He left his script over and over again and actually continued to thank them and congratulate them on for being there. And this is how The Economist, hardly a friend of religious leaders, oh sorry, it's gone. Yes, reported the incident. Mr. Ban told an audience of gorgeously attired Baha'is, Buddhists, Christians, Taoists, Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Shintos and Sikhs that you are the leaders who can have the largest, widest and deepest reach when warning people about climate change. Religions, he said, had established or helped to run half the schools in the world. They were amongst the world's biggest investors, and the global output of religious journalism was comparable, at least, to Europe's secular press. Good for The Economist, and good for them. And of course, the United Nations Secretary General was wise in addressing religious leaders, because even though there has been a drop in belief to unbelief, the ratio of belief to unbelief in the world's population over the last 100 years, and this is usually attributed to the consequence of agnosticism and atheism, where communism was once very powerful and where it decimated the religions of the indigenous populations, and of course the increasing secularization of the global north. Nevertheless, of the present population, which is estimated to be some 6.96 billion, around 6 billion people still identify themselves with a religious faith position. Now, if you wanted to put it on a chart, it looks something like this. I don't particularly like charts, and I don't like number crunching, but it does give you a flavour of the event and of the distribution of faith and faiths across people in our globe. Christian faith is still numerically the largest chunk of the pie, with the population reaching almost a quarter of the world's population. What saddens me, of course, with this pie chart is the all other. I just feel that somehow that's disrespectful to all the Jews and to the Sikhs and to the many others whose population is not in very large figures at the moment. Of course, with the Jewish population, it wouldn't be, would it? When 6 million of them went to the Holocaust in the gas chamber. And yet their significance remains inestimable. And I think we have to pay homage to those religious people who have worked tirelessly within the religious framework to do the things that we now know are important for the whole world. Despite this, and until the endorsement of Ban Ki-moon, and a strong religious presence, incidentally, in the campaigns and protests on climate change last year and the year before, the significance of religion hadn't been explored in the discussions of our environmental crisis. And in fact, when faith groups began to be included, those who were ready to do the inclusions had their knuckles very rapidly wrapped, and we had the usual put down from secularists, as it came on this again, the report from The Economist. When Lord May, the former chief scientist of Britain, said in September that religion might be needed to secure humanity's future, he was denounced by fellow secularists as a traitor. Such talk would open the way for theocrats to terrorize humanity anew with divine wrath, his critics said. So, we can reflect on why there's been a reluctance to see the importance of religion in opening up and addressing climate change. And I'm going to do that as briefly as I can before I go on to look at why it is important. And there are two quite different reasons, I think, behind this reluctance. And I think the first one is related to the public attitudes, cultural attitudes to religion that have been dominant, particularly in secularized societies where much of the debate has been going on and been initiated. And I would say that it's to do with four A's. First of all, absence of Christianity in the public sphere, and absence of religion in general in the public sphere. And you find it absent in our statistics, you find it absent in our courses, you find it absent in our academies. I was a social scientist for many years. I wrote some social science courses for one of the country's biggest universities, which I shan't mention, which was a course that went on for 6 years, and 16 of us wrote this course together. And I was aghast to find that in a course that lasted for 2 years, and went to 30 different units and was a book this thick, Christianity wasn't mentioned as part of the cultural fabric of our country. And when I raised this, they looked at me as if I just dropped off Mars. But it's irrelevant, it's got nothing to do with the way people live or are or be in our contemporary world. Similarly, if you wanted to find out anything about the statistical life of the UK, people in the UK. You normally go to the annual abstract of statistics, and I used to pore over this incredible thing every year. And there were categories of everything, categories of family life, of work, of births, marriages, deaths, of population, of mortality rates, and so on. Nothing on religion. If you wanted to find out anything about the religious life of people, you go to leisure. And there, tucked away in leisure, was a table of people who went to church and synagogue and things like that. Extraordinary. Just the way in which such an important dimension is absent in terms of how we view the public sphere in our country. It's changed. It's had to change. But nevertheless, I think the legacy is still there. And then there's the apathy. Much of the population of our country, and I think of much of Europe, is apathetic with regard to organised religion. Not apathetic towards spirituality, as I found out over and over again. If you talk about spirituality, you can tap into a ready vein of interest and excitement and dialogue and all kinds of things, because somehow spirituality is more personal, it's more to do with people's ordinary lives, whereas religion is something organised, it's outside, it's out there, and therefore there's a lot of apathy and in fact disinterest and despair in some senses towards it. And then of course there's antagonism from the media, which, as we heard earlier in the weekend, the media obsessed with fights, the fights between religions, the fights within religions, the fights between the conservatives and the radicals, the fights over sex, sexuality and homosexuality, and celebrity culture. And it treats religious communities just as it treats everything else in this banal, half-hearted, unconceptual, unthinking, mindless way, and it bores us to tears, but actually it continues. And finally then there's the final A, the attack from militant atheists, who have been far more evangelical and proselytizing than the most religious of our community in getting their message across. And I want to just have a bit of fun with them too, because it's about time we looked at what they've been saying and why they're saying it. The militant atheists, of course, have claimed to be coming from an erudite, academic, often scientific base, and have used that in order to clobber people with religion. We haven't got time to go through what they say, why they say it, and how they say it, but I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a taste. I met many of these people in different areas and had some interesting times. This, of course, is a scientific pronouncement of Richard Dawkins in the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, misogynist, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniac, etc., etc. I just ran out of patience and I decided that I'd had enough. But in a sense, this drip feeding of attitudes which are at best disrespectful and at worst downright insulting and actually inflaming hatred are part of the free speech in our country. And of course, those of us who live in London and were around London will remember the poster campaign and the Ross campaign a couple of years ago. There's probably no God, now stop worrying and enjoy your life. And it was interesting, and in many senses, even though it was aimed to jeer at and smear and demolish people's religious interests, it did the reverse, and it actually raised the debate, and we carried on. And we enjoyed the photographs of nubile young women and Richard Dawkins trying to look as though he was somewhere else. I'm recognising that the colour, everything about it, of course, is very clever, the colour scheme, the attractive, gorgeous, life-giving effervescence of the fact that there is no God, so now stop worrying and enjoy your life. And this spread, it wasn't just simply there, it spread to many other parts of the world. And then you get Sam Harris, a little-known neuroscientist, until he started writing his polemics against God. And this is what he says. It is American and basically to Muslims, but also to Christians. Non-believers like myself stand beside you dumbstruck by the Muslim hordes who chant death to whole nations of the living. But we stand dumbstruck by you as well, he's talking now to the American Christians, by your denial of tangible reality, by the suffering you create in service of your religious myths, and by your attachment to an imaginary God. And then he goes on in an, I think, quite scary vein. Some propositions are so dangerous it may be even ethical to kill people on believing about positivity. And so the very thing he's arguing against is now undermined by his own positions, having flattered us to death by his insightful comments on who we are. And so it goes on. There's probably no God, so stop worrying and enjoy yourself. And even the dogs are located and drawn into propaganda. And in America it takes different forms: praise Darwin, evolve, belong, belief, freedom for religion, foundation. Of course, it's interesting that this has often been put forward, this attack against religion, as being some kind of martyrdom by the secularists. And I love what Alvin Plantinga says, when they have both talked about the bravery and the courage they need, this is Dawkins and Dennett, in order to make forward these statements, fearing the death threats and so on they're going to receive. And Alvin Plantinga says, Dawkins and Dennett both appear to think it requires considerable courage to attack religion these days. Says Dennett, I risk a fist to the face or worse, yet I persist, brave man. It's not easy to take them seriously, says Plantinga. Religious bashing in the current Western Academy is about as dangerous as endorsing the party's candidate to Republican rally. I think that about puts a sum of it on it. And Madeline Bunting also has her own view on this, and I think this is very interesting. Atheism sells. At the end of the day, what is all of this about? She says any philosopher, professional polemicist, or scientist with worries about their pension plan must now be feverishly working on a book proposal. Science writer Matt Ridley commented that on one day at Princeton, he met no fewer than 3 intellectual luminaries hard at work on their books. So the way to actually make it in academia is to be an atheist, and is to actually ditch the careful science, the careful examination of the evidence, the careful sifting through and weighing up of arguments, and just go for polemicism and attack of Christians, Muslims, Jews, and anybody else in the vicinity, and you'll earn a lot of money. There's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. And of course the religious people have fought back, sometimes naffly, but cutely. The belief, the atheism, belief that there's nothing happened to nothing, there's nothing magically exploded, no God, etc. Sometimes not sophistication. There's probably no boss. From a different kind of area, because with this attack on religion and the whole idea of the religious right and the minorities getting very hot under the collar about these issues, the sense has been that ecology itself has become something of a religion. The Christian, who's now died, of course, attacked concern for climate change exactly from this position. He says today one of the most powerful religions in the West is actually environmentalism. It seems to be the religion of choice for urban atheists. Why do I say it's a religion, he says? Well, just look at the beliefs. If you look carefully, you'll see environmentalism is in fact a perfect 21st century remapping of traditional Judeo-Christian beliefs and myths. And then having listened to absurd predictions which had nothing to do with climate change whatsoever, and ignoring the very careful scientific documentation, Crichton then swipes out at them and says this: with so many past failures, although none of the failures he's mentioned has anything to do with climate science, you might think that environmental predictions will become more cautious. But not if it's a religion. Remember the nut on the sidewalk carrying the placard that predicts the end of the world, doesn't quit when the world doesn't end on the day he expects. He just changes his placard, sets a new doomsday date, and goes back to walking the streets. One of the defining features of religion is that your beliefs are not troubled by facts, because they have nothing to do with facts. Well, flattery will get him nowhere. And the interesting thing is, of course, is that anti-religions, what he's saying, anti-religions actually translate to being anti-anything that takes a principled, non-self-interest, committed stand on life, on the world, or on our behaviour. It's interesting that Pico Iyer once asked a question about this kind of mentality when he said, what nowadays are the issues we would live for? What are the passions we would die for? And his answer is, from this kind of mentality, nothing. We just want the kind of life where people do not take principled stands on things, because if they do, we will call them nuts, and we will call them religious, and that will be the end. Now the problem is, if it was just that was just the reason for the lack of engagement between the religious lobbies and the religious faith groups and environmental issues, we could easily deal with that. But of course it's not. The second reason is that we found problems within our own faith communities. And the communities themselves have often manifested an indifference towards the issues that lie beyond the confines of their local interests. And Christianity suffers from this just as much as any other Christian group, religious group. And it's not only in American right-wing fundamentalism that we'll get statements like that from James Dobson a few years ago in a letter he issued to the evangelical community when he said this. He said, "The only proper concerns for the evangelical community are the sanctity of human life, the integrity of marriage, and the teaching of sexual abstinence and morality to our children." And I found this out myself to some extent some years ago when I was going to an American college to give what were known as the kind of, I can't remember the name of the lectures, but some VIP lectures. And I decided to do some climate change and the issues of climate change, and this was to an American Christian college. And I phoned John Horton up and said, "Is there anything he could give me to bring me up to date on the whole issue?" And he said, "Have they accepted your title?" And I said, "Well, not yet, I haven't told them my title." He said, "Could I give you a bit of advice? Don't tell them." To the last minute until it's too late to change it. Otherwise they will not let you do it. So I took his advice, and they kept phoning, "What's your title?" And I kept saying, "Well, I'm working on several different options." And by the end, then I wasn't available, and my secretary answered, and she said she put a message through it. And 2 weeks before I went, I said, "I'm doing 3 lectures on climate change. One on its impact on the global poor, one on its impact on our own responsibilities as Christians," and so on. Dead silence on the other end of the phone. And then this person said, "Oh, Elaine, that's not where we are actually in our community right now. Do you have something on morality, sex perhaps?" No, nothing on sex at all. I did it, and it was actually quite an experience. Just to cut a very long story short, the lectures which had been mandatory were suddenly no longer mandatory. You could come if you wanted to. You didn't have to. Of course, more people came then because there was some reason why they weren't necessarily asked to come. The soil scientists in this particular university came out and said, "This is our position. We know that this is the case." And the lectures stopped for a whole day while seminar after seminar went in, and students were outraged that they had not been told the details that they were now getting. And one major donor withdrew funding from the particular college. Big issue, let's say that. It's not only in America, this is true of our own communities in the UK and elsewhere in the whole area. The consensus is seriously dented, however, not just because of the persistence of fine scientists who've gone and given the message forward, but actually because people have changed sides, taken note, and now I think the situation amongst Christians in the States is very different. Richard Cizik, who resigned from I think he was thrown out, the National Association of Evangelicals, has become an absolutely tireless campaigner on global warming and creation care. I want us to just quickly go on to where we need to look at in terms of how then we address the interrelationship between Christianity in particular and the whole area of climate change. My time is rapidly disappearing and I haven't got time to go into all of these. But I just want to say we touch into every single one of these areas, into a theology of God, a theology of God that actually talks about God as creator, but more than that, God as sustainer, as redeemer, God who makes all things new, God who puts us into a relationship with the creation, with each other. A God for Christians who is manifesting Christ, whom we're told in Colossians 1 holds all things together. I mean, there's an incredible mystical image of Jesus Christ at the very center of creation, holding the whole of creation, all of reality together in his own person. We can't get our minds around this for a mortal, but that's part of our theology of God. And our theology of human personhood, that persons are part of creation. We're not an additional extra, but we're also its stewards, its guardians, its caretakers. We're subject to the same laws that govern the universe. We're not to be polluters. We're not to express autonomous choice. We're not rational individuals. Our meaning is always in subjection to God and in relation to God. And the whole concept of human interdependence, human communal nature, and the fact that our lives are integrated with the lives of others, and the life of the creation itself is built into Christian revelation. It's part of who we are, how we're understood as people. We struggle with brokenness, we struggle with sin as human beings, and again, Christian faith acknowledges that. That's why it believes so fervently in redemption and in the need for relationships with God, with each other, and with the creation itself, to be redeemed, to be brought back, to be made new, to start again, to be much more productive and fulfilling and integrated, rather than just broken and damaged and in need of mending. And then we have theology of creation care. We've already gone through some of that of redemption, which centres upon Christ. Theology of neighbour love, asking us to safeguard the creation, not simply to protect the earth itself, but to protect our more vulnerable neighbours. We have a theology of justice, which similarly looks at the whole issue of money, of giving, of not hoarding back wages, of not accumulating for consumption, of not bribing, not tempting other people, not using power that we have over others to bring them in subjection, because we also have a theology of equal significance. Every single human being has equal significance before God. There is so much more. It seems too flippant almost to go on, but time is against me. So I want to just to stress the fact that there is so much in the Christian faith itself that gives us no excuse for not tapping into the whole area of sustainability and climate care, because every single area of our theology speaks into that in some way or another. Every single one of these areas has something also to say about the way that we view the creation that we live in. And of course, finally, there is a theology of judgment, that God is sovereign, that God is God, and God will ultimately ask us to be accountable for the way that we have used our lives and the way that we have used his creation. And we have to stand before the throne of God to face that. And again, I haven't got time to go through all of the wonderful poetic ways in which God expresses God's self and the love that God has for the creation. I love that one from Psalm 50. Every animal in the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountain, and the creatures of the fields are my own. There's something so beautifully poetic and tender and gentle and intimate about God's care for the creation. And even the parts of Job where Job is called to account. What can we do? Moving as quickly on to the end of the talk as I can. And I think there are several things we can do as faith groups in order to rectify what has gone before, in order to actually move away from this exclusion that we have had to suffer in terms of the debate on sustainability and on climate change. And I think there are several things, I want to go through them one by one. Some I want to reject and some I want to accept. We can offer a spiritual dimension to a secular debate, and I want to caution against this. We certainly come to these issues from the theological framework. We come to them with a faith perspective which is grounded in our understanding of God, in the revelation, especially for Christians, in the revelation that God has given us in the Old and New Testaments, in the Hebrew Scriptures, and our Gospels as well. But once we come to these issues recognizing that, we don't actually just want to have a spiritual tag on extra to what is a secular debate. We need to avoid any spiritual, material, sacred, secular, race-nature dichotomy, where our contribution is relegated to what culture in the North sees as the margins of irrelevance. We are actually at the centre of the very debate. It's not just an extra added-on spiritual dimension. It deals with the very material substance of the debate itself. We can also make individual contributions as believers, as practicing scientists, as technologists, as environmentalists, as business leaders, as economists, as political activists, and we're doing this. And it really gladdens my heart, and this conference has been wonderful because we have heard people who are those people who are speaking into the debate as people of faith, bringing who they are and whose they are to this discussion. And I want to pay homage to the many scientists who long integrated their Christian faith with their science, and it's clearly true of all faith groups that we've looked at this week. Further, we can draw attention to the consequences of the poor, to the fact that the outcomes of climate change bear most heavily to those in our faith communities who are particularly vulnerable. And we already know that the cost of non-sustainable future will be disproportionately borne, and in fact is already being disproportionately borne by the poorest people of the world. And so many of these poor people living in areas of ecological vulnerability in Africa, Asia, and elsewhere in the global south are actually members of our own faith communities. They're Christians, they're Muslims, they're Jews, they're Hindus, and so on. And in that sense, we have responsibilities for them for that reason alone. But more than that, we actually have responsibilities for, as our neighbours, as those that need to reach out for injustice and speak upon their behalf, because very often they have no means of speaking, they have no voice that they can raise because they are precisely in that position that deprives them of speech. And we've seen their struggles. Many of us who have travelled, even when I travelled with Tear Fund, I've seen the pain of people living in marginalised subsistence economies as they face water shortage, new strains of malaria, acidification of their water, soil erosion, diminishing livelihoods, increased health risks, and so on. And increase, even in things like maternal mortality rates not dropping as they should be, or infant mortality rates not dropping. A whole range of areas where people have become environmental refugees as the place they call home can no longer support their life. Next, we can actually engage in critical dialogue with our culture. From a faith position, we can offer a radical critique of the prevailing culture, adding our own voices in the debate on economics. And we've been doing a little bit of that this week, and there's so much more to do. And the more we talk about it, the more we signal up, the more we sound out our disenchantment with neoclassical economics in the way that we have done in a very fine way, I think, this week. The more we demand new ways of measuring things, the more we ask for new ways of looking at things like the GDP and asking if that is a significant index and so on. I think whether it's in economics or politics or issues of power or control, adding our voice, engaging in a critical dialogue with culture, whether it's on food issues, whether it's on supermarkets, but drawing our own database, drawing in the evidence from our own communities, why the orthodoxies that prevail are actually failing to provide a sustainable economic base and political base for the future. We can also challenge some of the philosophical assumptions about human personhood, which lie behind a lot of the orthodoxies we see in these disciplines. Personhood about autonomous, irrational, individualist choice, and so on, and change the debate in a whole range of these areas. We can exercise hospitality in debate and resources. I liked Douglas's point there, and talked about hospitality, so we can draw people together who don't share our faith base, who are not particularly bothered about the things that matter to us very, very deeply, who are actually quite insulting sometimes and even rude about what we believe, but who just might, through our own efforts, our own outreach, recognise the urgency of climate change, change their lifestyles and put their weight behind the campaigns of development of technology, make new technology known and so on. I think this next one is very important. Readdressing the education of our young. Church schools made a massive impact in our country. I was at Church Schools Head Teachers Conference last week, and I was just amazed at the numbers of kids who are going to church schools in the UK alone. And if you add to that all of the other Christian schools and the other faith-based schools, we have actually got a massive group of young people who are explicitly identifying with faith-based religions. So why are we not making integral issues of ecology, sustainability, responsible stewardship, creation care at the very centre of our curricula? We need to be weaving it into every area of study, whether it's geography or history or maths or science or arts or literature or economics or political science. We can do that. And it doesn't take the wit of a genius to be able to revise the curriculum so that our young people can be doing this. And if our faith schools are not taking these issues seriously, we only have ourselves to blame if the next generation is going to. And finally, we can mobilise our own global forces. We can join together in raising our voices, working together, taking action on whatever key issue. We can form coordinating strategies. We can go in for intelligence sharing, small regular campaigns where we talk to each other, where we have a way of communicating with each other across the faith divides and into these areas so that we know what's going on, rather than wait for the next big campaign that's going to draw us all together in 5 years' time. It'll be too late, as Bill has already told us that. And friends, we have our differences as members of different faith groups. We have differences, we could sit here for the next 5 days and discuss those differences. It actually divides us at a confessional level. We've got different views of law very often, different views, different confessional bases. We've got different responses to God in a number of areas. And these differences are important. We don't want to sweep them under the carpet and say they don't matter, they don't be minimalised. I will argue with any one of you. Please queue up afterwards about the centrality of Jesus Christ and his uniqueness in the history of our world and in God's relationship with us. I will argue till the cows come home. I believe it passionately. I have based my life on it. I've been in dialogue with Jewish rabbis for 20 years, and there's plenty of things to talk about. There's plenty also of opportunities for disagreement, distrust, disregard, and disappointment in our relationships with each other. But we are people of faith. We live in one world. We live in the same world. We know that this is God's world. We know it's in danger. We know the risks. We know the damage. We know the urgency. We know with our own responsibilities. We know our own power. We know the actual street number of votes. We know our access to global communities, to young people, to resources, to people's hearts, minds, energies, and commitments. So what I want to do at the end of this conference is just plead with all of us to agree to celebrate our differences, but then to come together in faith, and in trust, and in hope, and respect, and dare I say, even love. Love for God and love for God's creation, and commit ourselves to concerted and global action, to working together, supporting those agencies like Friends of the Earth and all the ones that we celebrated this week, to do proper coordination, to share intelligence, to keep our ears to the ground, to pass information on, to find out what's going on, what we need to respond to, what we need to react to. Only then can we produce a tipping point in this whole debate. We can muster votes, we can actually bring campaigns and the power of faith in a different area. And I do believe that only we have the resources to do that. Only we have the resources to keep this issue right at the very centre of the global agenda. Only we know the enormous responsibilities that God has put on the shoulders of the human race. Every person made in the image of God. We can do it. We can do it together. Are we going to do it?
We need to look much more fundamentally at what education is for and how we do that. So can we have some suggestions on that? I'd love to see church schools take the lead. As Nigel said, at the moment, they're not doing so.
Who wants to go first? Elaine?
Yeah, church schools, I'm passionate about church schools, and I think that in many ways they are the success story of our culture. I was just amazed at the number of people who are queuing up to get into a church in school app, even willing to go to church. And why is that? It's because on the whole they don't have the same level of discipline problems, they don't have ASBOs, they don't have people who are absent for long periods of students and so on, and they get relatively good results. But also the teachers on the whole engage with the children to a level of respect, and I think maybe they have given up from in other areas where it's very, very difficult to educate. I mean, I could tell you plenty of stories, but I won't. But the curriculum usually comes at the end, because basically the thinking about church schools is often about morality, is often about instilling a kind of sense of responsibility, giving them something about God to believe in, if they can possibly manage to persuade them to do that. But the curriculum, how this actually works out in the curricular thing, I just don't think has been tackled. And I've been saying this to head teachers for a long time, and their response is, okay, who's going to be doing it? Where are the educationists that can feed into the system to actually do this? If you know any, please tell them to offer us some help. So I think it is up to us as members of faith groups, whether our schools are Jewish schools or Islamic schools or Christian schools, to actually find out who the people who can write curricula and then try to feed them into the schools themselves. In my own experience, when I've had a go at this, it's only been once because I'm a busy person, and it was just at the back of an envelope, sitting down with a head teacher and saying, look, this is what I think it might look like in this particular area. I mean, to my amazement, that they went to the Stapleton Centre and said, could you work with this? And the Stapleton Centre said yes, and they do a curriculum that then that school actually implemented for the next 3 or 4 years. So it's not that they're closed, it's just that they're busy, and on the whole, they haven't seen the need until relatively recently, but I think the need is there now, and I think people are seeing it. And if every one of us who has children in church schools, or is a governor of a church school, or is in a neighbourhood near a church school, starts to write to the church schools themselves, I think we might see some kind of difference.
Or offering to go in because of time, as you say.
Absolutely.
Do you have any views on facing up to our past? The question Jan raised of what has been done in the past.
Was it on church schools?
Well, we can come back to church schools in a minute. That's just such a
Well, what we are doing now is facing up to our past, and this is what I've like saying in my talk, that we have created a world which is out of sync with the natural paradigm. We are in another place, and we have to both educate ourselves and our children and see a way of getting out of this conundrum. And that's a long haul, and we don't have time. And talking about education per se, we work at two particular levels. One is how do we communicate with the Muslim world about what is happening, not just about climate change, but a whole attitude to the environment. Climate change is perhaps the ultimate manifestation of what we are doing, but there are lots of other issues. And this is an uphill task. And we work through the scriptures, and we try and attempt from the Quran and the Sharia to attempt to show people why they should behave differently vis-a-vis the environment. I think, from my experience, it's better to go directly to the sources, the Quran and the Sharia, rather than go through the environmental dialogue, because people don't understand. Because the thing is so big and so diffuse, they don't understand environment. Because when we went to Zanzibar and did this work in the marine conservation zone in Zanzibar, fishing and dynamiting coral reefs, and we spoke to them the language of Khalifa, which is one of the elements that I attempted to show quite briefly on the screen there, was an aspect of stewardship, Khalifa stewardship. So they took home that role and they stopped dynamiting coral reefs in 24 hours, what the NGOs couldn't do in 4 years. The other aspect is education per se, the kind of things that we address every day when we send our students to school. I think Alvin Toffler quite accurately described the education system where he wrote in 1960 when he wrote Future Shock. And the education system is in fact an industrial system. It puts you on a conveyor belt. At the end there is a product which is ready for the industry or whoever wants to employ it. So in the end they become wage slaves. And I think it is this model that we need to look at. We need to change it if we are going to. David Orr, when he said people with BAs, BScs are the people who are the problem with the environment, this is what he was talking about. We need to change the nature of education. We need to change the nature of jobs. Where people talk about green jobs, that sounds good, it's a sound bite, but I think we need to go beyond that. We need to change the way we live in this world. That we cannot afford to have factories anymore using fossil fuels and producing things and consuming them. We are either producers or consumers. So we have to move away from that.
Thank you. Let's see if there's any more comments on the whole area of education, because this is such an important one, yes. Maybe people here who are teachers or have been teachers.
Hi, yeah, just a quick comment. There are resources out there. I've just completed a training program with Oxfam called the School Speakers Scheme, and they have a huge amount of online resources relating to climate change and all sorts of other ethical issues that are related to their work. And any school can invite a school speaker to come in and talk about and engage children with issues of climate change, poverty, all sorts of things, social justice, at whatever level. And they also strive to fit these in with the curriculum at lots of different stages, so for primary school and secondary school. And there are other resources out there, not related to Oxfam, but just if you search school resources curriculum, as you say, it can be included into any subject, into any curriculum, from maths, English, history, geography. So the resources are there. I think a lot of the onus is on the schools and the teachers to actually put that into practice in their lessons.
I agree, and Fazlun and Kaplan and so on, those are the same sort of kind of resource base using all that stuff as well.
Okay, another question. We'll stick to this education just for the moment.
I'd like to sound a word of caution about education and children, about teaching children things. One of the predictors of pro-environmental behaviour and attitudes in adulthood is not what you're taught, but it's to do with the amount of time and the kinds of experiences you've had of the natural world, how much time you've spent outside, messing about in the country, actually in nature. And I think the work of exclusion, for example, in the book Last Child in the Woods is a very interesting discussion of some of those issues. And so the task of educators might not be so much to go into schools and tell children, as to take children out of school into the world around them. Because I think it's also questionable whether, in trying to tackle climate change, we should be asking those who are least powerful to bear the weight of responsibility. And I think there are some ethical questions about focusing on children which need to be considered in that.
Thank you. We'll come down here. I must say that I've heard it said that often children come home from their lesson at school and say, educate their parents. Yeah, Mum, why are we doing that still? What about the rainforest? And actually, it has worked that way sometimes.
I just want to reinforce. Is it working? No.
Hold it near you anyway.
I want to reinforce what the last speaker was saying, and to refer people to a book written by D.H. Lawrence called Fantasia in the Unconscious, Essays in Psychoanalysis, or something like that. And in it he said, schools should be abolished for 3 generations, because all they've done is actually to destroy different centres inside the growing human being, the child, which makes it, which actually, so everything is stuck in the brain, everything whizzes through this, and they become damaged in a sort of organic level. And I think it's so true that the education system just propagates anxiety, competition, achievement, and it is all the underlying message is it's about your job. You're going to get this employment. We can't deny that. That's, I know it's radical stuff, but that's actually what's going on. And we can't, have our cake and eat it. So I just say no more less.
Thank you. Any other comments on education? Yes, okay.
I mean, it's probably worth saying Ivan Illich was saying those kinds of things in the 1960s. And he's always been right, as far as I'm concerned. We took our kids out of school for a year, and they flourished.
Jeff Stratford, retired school teacher. I agree precisely with what Dave said in his introduction to get this question going about the way schools are going wrong. And it's because of what we've asked schools to do, successive governments, and they do. But I think a lot of primary children are being taught the right stuff by enthusiastic teachers. But if they watch the way in which the world works, and they watch the way in which their schools operate, those signals contradict what they're learning at school, so they say, well, this is rubbish, I need to take it.
Thanks. Well, that was very helpful on the... Do you want to have some...
Just a comment on that. I agree with you entirely. And I think what we're trying to do is redress that balance in a very small way, because we are in discussion with the National Trust of taking children from the inner city Quran school out into the country to give them exposure to the natural world. So I agree on this.
How about a question on some wider topics of global perspectives? What have we got next? Let's start from the back.
Andy Atkins, human being and friends of the earth. I really want to support what Elaine was saying about the need for greater coordination and intelligence sharing. And we've recently, in order to have more influence on politics, I absolutely agree that church and faith organisations have so much potential power, but it's not being used at the moment to anything like the effect it could be, I think. I've just had a recent experience of actually upping the degree of coordination between the big environmental NGOs, and much of what you're seeing now in the press around planning and all the rest of it is actually a result of much greater coordination behind the scenes between the big environmental NGOs. I'd just be really interested to know from those who are perhaps here in the audience, as opposed to on the panel necessarily, who are from the faith organisations working on climate and the environment, what are your coordination mechanisms? Do you have plans to step them up? Because now is a good time, even today, to talk to each other to make plans before we leave. Second thing, just an offer. I talked about the campaign we're about to launch, which will be trying to transform our energy system, which is, in our view, the single best thing we can do to cut carbon emissions in this country. I'll leave a piece of paper on the table. If you want details of it, please give me your name and your email, and I'll give you advance warning of the campaign that we launch next month. We're inviting anybody who wants to come on board. I'm not asking for money, not asking you to join Friends of the Earth. I'm giving you a way of making a difference individually in your faith communities or whatever. So I'll stick that on the table after this.
Thank you, Andy. Jonathan, on the way down to the front.
Hi, this question might relate a little bit to that, actually. The first question is more conceptual, and that is, you very helpfully have shown how in both Islam and Christianity there is a strong environmental ethos. What I'm curious about is if there's something distinctive about, for example, a Muslim approach to environmental issues and a Christian approach to environmental issues. And that's related, of course, to what, should we encourage our faith communities to become, to join IFES or Tier Fund or Friends of the Earth, or all three? In other words, how are we most effective, and what are the religious and conceptual reasons for doing one or the other?
Thank you. And then you had a question, sir? Don't come here. Oh, there's another one online. Yeah, let's take two more.
Thanks to Andy for the comment regarding faith organisations. Just to add that I'm currently coordinating the Environmental Issues Network of CTBI, which brings together the people within the churches and the Christian environmental agencies. We'd be very pleased to if people would like to know more about that, and I can say a bit more about some of the stuff that we're looking to maybe achieve over the next year. But I very much agree with Andy that the churches and the Christian environmental groups, I think, need to set up their game in terms of their coordination and action.
Right, well, we'll finally get to you.
Elaine Storkey, but this is for Fazlun. I just very much enjoyed your treatment of money, but want to echo it in the sense that I think we've moved on beyond fractional banking. So old fractional banking was 8% of cash and 30% of liquid assets. What we've gone to with the creation of electronic money is something down to 2% of cash, an incredible expansion, which has worked out at about 30 or 40 billion a year of straightforward windfall in terms of money creation to the banks, which adds up to £2 trillion over the last 3 decades, effectively as its stature. And that not only pays for a lot of banker bonuses, but for the illusion that there is largely around money and in terms of what we converge. So just thanks for that.
Okay. Do you want to respond about the distinctiveness of the Christian or Muslim approach? I mean, both have been very conceptual. Is there other differences?
Yes, I mean, I think that all the Semitic Abrahamic religions share a very similar understanding of creation and a very similar understanding of sin and the way in which human endeavour and human brokenness and alienation has destroyed and harmed creation, and the way in which greed and usury have corrupted human relationships and the impact that this has had on creation. So I think we are very, very similar in understanding the structures of the framework. I think the difference always in Christianity is the person of Christ, and that redemption for us begins with Christ's life, death and mission here that's joining us in this earth as well as us, and therefore has been the mediator between the human race and Father God. And therefore the whole redemptive possibilities following Christ's mission, Christ's work, Christ's death, open up a new possibility within Christianity, a new heavens, a new earth, a new redemptive future, where there's proper forgiveness of sins and we can actually go on and make things new. Now I'm not sure. I'm sure that there's something similar in Islam, but I don't know enough about it to be able to say. But that's where we are, and therefore in the New Testament you have this picture of creation itself groaning and travail. It's a picture of childbirth, waiting in themselves, waiting for the redemption of the people of God, waiting for the people of God to be themselves redeemed so that they can take the creation into a new era.
Fazlun, do you want to
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of common ground, and I'd say, she's eloquently stated the Christian religion, we'd say, in the Quran says, we take responsibility for our own actions, and it's on our particular shoulders. Having said that, in very practical terms, I see a lot of common ground in working together with the Christian community in changing what is going on in the world today. With one proviso, one condition, I would say they'll have to give up usury. I'm reminded that some years ago, I we work very closely with the Christian Council for Monetary Justice in London. I know they're still around, but we stopped hearing from them. And we, in fact, went to the House of Parliaments and had a session with the MPs. This was way back in the middle of the 90s, about 20 years ago. And their argument was that the aspect of money creation should be the state one. The private bank shouldn't be allowed to create money. The fractional reserve system should be a monopoly of the state. So the state will know how much money to create. They do it now anyway. Quantitative easing, they do it now quite easily. They're printing money by the billion. But they can do it now. So well, we'd rather not have that. But I think for the environmental ethic to really work, you have to be real. I think, without putting too fine a point on it, we are living a lie. You think of all these things that are created out of nothing, and you're surviving on this nothing, and fractional reserve system is gone through the window, and money is coming out of the walls, out of nothing. So if we don't address that particular issue, you'll never get the environmental situation correct. So there is some way to go. And if we had anything to do with it, and in the model that we presented, it can be done today. If you go and work in local communities in Nigeria or Indonesia, we would say localize, have your local currency, local means of exchange, local production, and deal with that yourself. That's the way we would go.
Thank you. Well, I think we should thank our two speakers very much.